Hello, I'm Arvin Hickman, news editor of PRWeek UK, and I'm joined by Rania Zalami, the area director for Meltwater's Middle East, India, and Africa operations. Of course, many of you will be familiar with Meltwater's media monitoring and social listening tools. Rania is a founding member of Meltwater's Middle East team and a female leader in the software as a service tech industry. In fact, she spent the past decade hiring and managing high performance teams, and today we're going to have a quick chat about how she motivates and manages staff well-being through these very difficult times. Welcome to PRWeek Connect, Rania.
Thank you so much, Arvind.
Well, to begin with,
sorry. Everyone,
That's right. Thank you. To begin with, the coronavirus has been a very challenging time for a lot of employers and employees, with remote working and isolation taking a toll on staff mental health. I just wanted to ask you, Rania, because we've written a lot of stories about how mental health has impacted employees in the communications industry. I just wanted to know how companies can ensure their team's well-being is being properly managed at this time.
Of course. So before I even answer the question, right, mental health is a topic that has always been important, but given the pandemic, the priority has obviously increased. And as someone who is personally very invested and interested in mental health, and with a sister who's also a counseling psychologist, I see the necessity for companies to pay attention and invest in resources for employee mental health. And if we look at some statistics and data out there, we can see the importance of ensuring the team's well-being. Because if not, then we end up having, actively disengaged employees who are, either negative about the job or creating a negative work environment, which is something we obviously want to avoid. So to answer your question, what are companies doing? Lots of things. So the majority of employers are increasing their investment in mental health programs, stress management as well, and mindfulness and meditation. Meditation is something I'm personally very invested in since before even the pandemic, and I've seen the impact it's had personally for me and also within the team that I'm directly managing. HR departments are also preparing for a significant reconsideration of diversity and inclusion initiatives and a renewed focus on employee engagement and mental health, and just the discussions overall on how technology can be used to help employees when it comes to engagement and their well-being as well. Because again, in turn, not only do we not have employees who feel good, but we can make sure that they directly impact the organization in a positive way.
Are there any specific mental health initiatives or mental health and well-being initiatives, I should say, that you find work for you and your team?
Yes, quite a few. So we basically make sure that we support each other throughout the entire day or whatever tasks we have, a lot more. We also, at the beginning of the pandemic with the uncertainty and people working from home and everybody has their own kind of setup, we wanted to make sure that we gave allowance, so some money to spend on, whether it's desks or chairs, to make sure that they have a good working environment. On the culture side, gamifying the process in general, we've had different, cooking shows that we've done on our team. So cooking together for Ramadan last year. We've had well-being sessions, global ones, where we got external speakers, and always encouraging work-life balance, because sometimes whenever you look at, the amount of work that you have, you tend to not have that break where you used to go to the office and you used to clock out and at least you had that kind of stop. But making sure that we have that work-life balance, allowing for mental health leave. So if anybody feels a bit, either burnt out or exhausted, making sure that they're vocal about it. I think what's also important, and we tend to forget as leaders, is our own well-being. We want to make sure that our well-being is also considered and thought about, to make sure that we pass on, positive energy as well to our team. And I'm proud to also say that Meltwater actually just won Comparably Awards for Best Global Culture. So all the efforts that the company has put in, we can actually see that the rewards, the external rewards for that.
Okay. Work-life balance is a really interesting one, actually. And I think it's really sort of pertinent to the past year where we've all had remote working. A lot of agency leaders and other communications professionals are really grappling with the idea of where they sort of set specific boundaries between work and home life. It's obviously a global trend. I'm just curious to know what sort of tactics you believe employers can use to sort of keep their staff motivated while sort of working remotely.
Yeah, so motivation is very important. We want to make sure that our employees are happy, feel secured. And I think one of the most important thing is obviously the communication side. We want to make sure that there's transparency and internal communication for building a culture for transparency, as I mentioned, between management and employees to make sure that they engage. And we also need to remember that internal communication is just not just about the issues management. It's a day in, day out, helping to create a sense of ownership and hearing what the employees want to say. So in terms of just motivation, hearing what they have to say, because even again, as leaders, you don't have all the answers. And it's always nice to hear what employees have to say and the input that they have to give. So I would say on the motivation side, kind of having that transparency, communication, and just making sure that employees always feel a sense of engagement and they can feel that they can always give input. Because the second you kind of, put a block there, the employee will tend to kind of feel disengaged and in turn demotivated, which of course would impact the company as well and the results of the company.
So that listening piece is obviously very important, but I just want to sort of come back a little bit in terms of setting those boundaries between work and home, especially now as a lot of the workforce are doing a lot of remote working. How do you do that with your teams? How do you make sure that they're getting a sufficient work-life balance?
Many things. So we wanted to make sure, right, at the beginning, we were used to physical meetings. We were used to, quick phone calls, but we seemed to have Zoom calls at the beginning, and we noticed that was used quite significantly. And there was the term that came up of Zoom burnout. So the first thing is, I would say, only have a Zoom call if necessary. Cameras as well. We've noticed that whenever you have the camera on all the time, the person tends to kind of focus on themselves, and kind of looking at themselves rather than actually listening to the conversation. So there's a lot of things that we, are doing to make sure that employees, have that work-life balance and have that buy-in, I guess, towards the organization.
Okay. Now, managing staff wellbeing has traditionally, I guess, been the domain of HR, but you argue that corporate communications has a really important role to play in employee happiness. Can you please sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, there was an article actually I read recently looking at how the role of HR is kind of now being spread out with the responsibilities with the management as well, because we're the ones that are constantly speaking with the employees. So when it comes to the engagement and how HR has to focus on other things, right, and kind of helping us with the global aspect. What we do at Meltwater is on the local leadership side, we focus on a lot of things that HR would do on a global scale. So it's kind of looking at we work together to make sure that we have that partnership. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that employees are happy and they feel invested in, because the second they don't feel that, they tend to disengage. And HR obviously trains us to be able to identify whenever an employee is no longer, invested or looking. And that's when you start to kind of feel that the employee is going to look elsewhere for an organization that is investing in their well-being and their growth as well. To also remember that point, right? The growth aspect. We want to make sure employees still feel that despite a pandemic, despite all the things that are happening outside that may be negative, there is still the growth aspect. There is still a promotion that can still happen. So despite the pandemic happening outside, we've had, just last week, we've promoted 5 people within one office because of the efforts that they've put in to make sure that they are successful and that the organization as well is successful.
Okay. Do you see a bit of a blurring of the lines between HR and communications, particularly internal communications? And has the pandemic sort of accelerated this? Yes
and no. So I think we definitely still need an HR department. And I'm referring to the article that I read that stated that, is HR kind of, stagnating away, and are we going to just have a leadership team doing everything? I think that would become an overload, and then the leadership team would then be overwhelmed. So we want to make sure that everybody has that sense of support. And it's kind of, marrying the relationships together and being able to understand where HR can jump in. And when it comes to the global aspect, and that's where HR can help, because there are certain things that globally will work. But then when you look at it on a local scale, that's where the leadership team can then localize the efforts and make sure that specific employees can get the support that they want. Because we also need to consider the diversity. Being in the UAE, we have people from every single background that you can think of, but that's not the same case. That's also the same case in the US and in Europe. So there is that diversity and inclusion that we still need to invest in. And HR has the experience, the expertise. They can train us, but at the end of the day, they have the expertise.
Okay, and in terms of, you mentioned like managing a global workforce and how you have diversity in different markets, but the diversity is different, and I guess the rules of engagement are different. How do you manage the different comms, internal comms responses? Do you sort of localize that quite a bit, the messaging?
We do, but again, we combine it, right? So you'll have the HR global policy. So I'll give you an example again. Globally, our HR has required people to work remotely, and it's optional. But that said, in Dubai, we have our office open because in terms of the local laws, you can have the office open as long as you have social distancing. So that's where the local aspect has come in. We've allowed employees to go in. And I think that's where we combine the global HR saying it's optional and actually opened up the office and allowing employees to decide if they want to come in or not, because there is that flexibility. There is still a pandemic going on, and we want to make sure that employees feel the sense of freedom to decide where they want to work, as long as they can, be productive.
Okay. How can organizations measure the value of their efforts in this space? And what are some of the sort of key performance indicators you believe people should prioritize?
In terms of how do you measure it, there's quite a few things that you can do. The first one is surveys. Those are quite important for us to have. And when I say surveys, it's basically, global surveys sent out to employees that are completely anonymous. So, they don't need to basically fear that whatever they communicate is, going to be held against them, because that will never be the case. So surveys are very important for us. And also we have monthly, catch-ups. So every single director has a team that they have to have monthly catch-ups with. And that's where you're able to kind of hear the feedback. So we have a very open culture when it comes to feedback. It goes both ways, because as long as it's one way, again, you start to get into a trap of employee disengagement. So that's where the feedback really starts from both sides. And I'll be honest, I've had feedback given to me, which, was constructive and it was fair. So I implemented it right away. So again, it's just a matter of just being open, the open culture, open feedback, surveys, and also HR, being available in case that person is, being directly managed by their manager. They can always reach out to other employees within the organization.
Okay. Given the changing working patterns, what does the future of employee engagement, inclusion, and well-being look like? I know this is quite a big question, but looking into your crystal ball, what do you think we're going to see?
So the future, honestly, is looking good. Companies are investing a lot of time and energy and money to ensure this. So we will see this pay off, as we go. There are two major reasons why employee engagement should be at the top of the mind for companies. The first one is they need to make diversity and inclusion a top priority. So I think that's going to be a big chunk of our future, and engagement. Okay. So the remote workforce, I think, is here to stay for quite a significant amount of companies, especially tech companies where, not necessarily if you're not you need to be on the ground. There is going to be a huge move towards the workforce. You can already see that with sharing workspace. People weren't going to the office back then. Now you're just doing the sharing workspace and you're doing it at home. So I think it is a trend that kind of got accelerated because of the pandemic, but it was a trend that was happening regardless. So that's my opinion.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Rania, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time. And thank you, Arvin.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening.